Several years ago, there was a movie that was produced and played called Legends of the Fall. Did anybody watch that movie? Okay. I remember going to that movie thinking, wow, this is going to be epic. You know, the scenes, Man from Snowy River like music, and it's going to be exciting, and wow, this is going to be one of these great movies. And it's one of those that was Brad Pitt's like first big movie, all right? And they always had him in that hat and all that kind of stuff and chewing on a piece of grass. For some reason, people think that's good looking. But anyway, so they had this great thing, and then I went to the movie all ready for this movie thinking, oh, this is going to be so cool, and not because of the Brad Pitt thing, but it's because there's horses and war and all of that. I thought, wow, this is going to be great. And I sat through the movie, and I don't know about what your impression was of that movie, but when I left, that was the most depressing, saddest excuse of a movie. Everybody dies, I think. The dad has heart attacks. The boy goes to World War I and dies. The girl shows up, and just from that moment on, it just craters. And Legends of the Fall, yeah, it was a legendary fall. It was just awful. I remember walking, I go in the movie and go, why do I need to go pay $9 for this? I can read the newspaper. You walk out. I go to the movies to get away from it all. You know, Iron Man, The Expendables. I mean, I want to go and just pretend nothing matters. I just want to have fun in the movie. I walked out of there just feeling awful. And after I finished reading Genesis chapter 27, you can't help but feel the same way. If you have your Bibles, turn to that chapter. There's two very sad chapters in the book of Genesis, and these might be the top two chapters that are the most saddest. Genesis chapter 3, you can hear the heart of God breaking as mankind rebels willfully. They call it the fall. It's really more like a jump. I don't think Eve fell into the tree face first and ate an apple. She jumped, or a piece of fruit. She jumped into rebellion and jumped into sin. Chapter 27, you see the implosion of a family. It just explodes. It's heart-wrenching when you read this. There is not a single character in the chapter that is good. There's usually a protagonist and an antagonist. There's the good guy and there's the bad guy. They're all bad. In fact, the whole story of Genesis 27, not one mention of God. He's not in it in a visible way. He's the ultimate protagonist. He's the ultimate good guy. But he's not even cited in this chapter. It's all bad. I hope this sermon isn't as bad as this chapter. But look what I'm dealing with. It starts in Genesis chapter 27, verse 1. You know the primary characters in this. It starts off with Isaac. It says, when it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, my son. And he said, here am I. Sound a little bit familiar? God said that to Abraham just a few chapters ago. But it's been about 120 years between chapter 26 and 27. I think it's important to add time to Scripture. Isaac dies when he's at 180. And so here his eyes are dimming. He's getting close to death. So it's somewhere. He had Esau and Jacob when he was 60. And so those two boys are about 120 years old now. So we're not dealing with little babies anymore or teenagers. We're dealing with full-grown men. And so here you have this father figure. The patriarch says, come, son, come to me. He says, here I am. Isaac says, behold, now I am old and I do not know the day of my death. But it's closer than it was yesterday. That's my ad-lib. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die. Now pretend you don't know the story. Pretend this is the first time you've heard it or the first time you've read it. What's wrong with this picture? What's happening here that isn't right? He says, go and get game for me. Find some wild food or kill an animal. Bring it, prepare it so that I may bless you. Wait a second. Just a few chapters ago, who's supposed to have the blessing? Who's supposed to be the one that is going to be the primary promise carrier into the future? That's not Esau. It's Jacob. What's going on with Isaac? His eyes are dim, but he's even blinder than his eyes are. He's lost vision. God has given him a promise. That promise was to carry through Jacob. And what does he do towards the end of his life? He's going to flat out disobey God. He's doing something he knows very well is wrong. Who is supposed to receive this blessing? Is it Esau? Not in the least. It's Jacob. Jacob is the one. But his eyes are growing dim. He's feeling like he is going to pass away, and so he calls to secure the future for his son, and he calls the wrong son. Notice the sensories that are being used here. His eyes, his taste. His eyes have grown dim. His vision is gone, both the vision of his eyes and the vision that God has given to him and his boys. He is now driven by his taste rather than God's vision. Have you ever had that experience in your life where you're driven by your taste rather than your vision that God has? God has been very clear with Jacob, and Rebekah knows it, who is supposed to receive the blessing, but he willfully plans to disobey. I think we can learn this from him. Driven by your taste rather than God's vision will lead to destruction. I think he's driven by comfort over calling, because in his culture, the oldest is to receive the blessing, not the youngest. The oldest is supposed to receive the position of authority over the tribe and over the family, not the youngest. But if he were to do that, he contradicts his culture as well. He would rather be comfortable. He would rather have it easy, so he takes the calling and sets it aside and chooses his comfort. And then maybe it's doubt. Maybe he thinks he heard it wrong. Maybe 120 years ago when God gave him that promise, that maybe he misunderstood it, or perhaps God changed his mind. Maybe he heard wrong, but I think ultimately he is choosing preference over obedience. He is calling out Esau rather than Isaac. I'm not sure what is keeping Isaac exactly from obeying God's revelation, but I know that I can relate on a personal level. My taste, my comfort, my doubt has gotten in the way of obedience. Anyone relate to that? On some level, your taste, your doubt, your comfort gets in the way. We can overanalyze things. We can look at this and that and try to rationalize it. But the reality is we become more passionate about our vision than God's. And that's what happens to Isaac here in the end. He decides that his vision is more important. It's his vision that's more necessary. I remember when I was a kid sitting on the couch inside of my living room, and I would be watching TV or something back then when cartoons were actually like hand-drawn. You remember those cartoons? When Mickey Mouse looked like a mouse and all those different, Donald Duck was real. I would hear my mom call me. She would say, "Bob." I'm watching TV. I would delay the inevitable. I would just sit there and watch TV. She would say, "Bob, Bob, Robert, Michael." Now that last one in the clearing of the throat, I could hear for miles. I remember sitting in church. My mom was playing the organ up here, and she would clear her throat. Over the organ, over 150 people singing, I would hear the clearing of the throat. I can still hear it now. She would clear her throat, and then I would jump. My poor mother, I don't know why she still loves us. But she would clear that throat, she would call my name, and I would get up. I heard her on the first time. I heard her the second time. I heard her before she used my full name, and I heard her before she cleared her throat. Now, as a parent, I can see why that is so frustrating. I'll call my son, and he'll hear me. I know she hears me. I do it 3 times, and the 4th time, then they respond. And doesn't the natural world reflect the spiritual world very clearly? Don't you find that with God, too? He calls you, you know what it is, but you're going to make him call you at least 3 times, and then he'll clear his throat, and then you'll run to him. We should, as believers, obey quickly. And as children, anyone? Yes. Obey quickly. Fast. When you hear God call, follow him. Get up and move. Isaac fails to lead his son in the way he should go. And I look at that story as a father and son picture here. Wouldn't it have been awesome if Isaac finds Esau and says, "Esau, this is your life's calling. This is what God wants for your life. You are going to serve your brother. I know you're not going to like it, but that's God's will for you, and I'm going to help you do that." Wouldn't that have been an awesome story if the dad would have led his son to fulfill his son's calling? It's a tragedy that he didn't. He seems to foster in Esau a delusion. And I think Isaac gets caught up in living vicariously through his son, hoping that his son will be all that he hasn't been. He should be pushing Esau to be a servant rather than filling him with the false hope of being something that he's not. But it doesn't stop there. The tragedy of Isaac is followed up by the tragedy of Rebekah. Look what she's doing in verse 5. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went out to the field hunting for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob. Now, you remember who else was eavesdropping? In the story of Abraham and Sarah, there's one time when Sarah stood outside the tent and was eavesdropping on Abraham and the Lord talking. It's kind of funny how these things mirror each other. So there is Rebekah hearing Esau get the command from Isaac to go find something, kill it, bring it home. And she goes, whoa, wait a minute. Now, wouldn't it have been awesome if Rebekah hears that cry, hears that command, and she says to Jacob, Jacob, come, we need to pray. And we need to face God here and turn to God because your dad is doing something crazy. He's lost not only his eyesight, he's lost his mind. But she doesn't. She doesn't bring Jacob into dependence upon God. She acts in fear. She begins to manipulate. She says to him, behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring the 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, that he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat it, so that he may bless you before his death. She begins to conspire against her husband. Isn't this crazy? Now, they've been married for like 100, I would guess, probably 140 years, okay? That's about how long they've been married. I don't know what happens to a marriage after 140 years, okay? Something might have happened over the course of 140 years that has caused her and Isaac to separate a little bit there. 140 years. We celebrate 70 years of marriage. This is twice that long, okay? And so something's gone crazy there, and she calls Jacob. But look at what Jacob says. Wouldn't it have been awesome if Jacob said, what? What? No, Mom, I'm not doing that. That's crazy talk. Mom, you're nuts. He doesn't do that either. He's complicit with it. He says, okay, I'll do it. And he does exactly what his mother says. A couple things I think we can learn from Rebekah on this. She's led by fear rather than faith. She's trying to protect her son. You remember early on in their lives, it says in chapter 25 or 26, it says that Rebekah loved Jacob and Isaac loved Esau. There's a division in the home. And so she is working in fear, trying to protect her son, not in faith, trying to guide her son. And it's the same thing with Isaac and Esau. They're working out of fear, not out of faith. God has made promises to Jacob, and he doesn't need Rebekah's help to fulfill those promises. He needs her faith that those promises will be fulfilled. A marital thing I see in this. She turns away from Isaac rather than turning to Isaac. There's a thing in marriage that happens over years when a couple is married and they begin to turn away from each other. A crisis happens and they turn away. They don't turn to. I get the opportunity to stand in front of couples and do wedding ceremonies, and it's a wonderful thing. But prior to that wedding ceremony, we do a marriage counseling. My job is not to do the wedding. My job is to prepare them for marriage. And one of the things that we talk about is expectations and what's going to happen. And eventually we stand up here on the platform or in some other church, and there we stand, and they're in love. The optimism, the joy, the hope is palatable on the platform. You can almost feel it. It's just so neat, and it's so exciting. And then I pronounce them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. That's if I remember to do all that. And then they walk off the platform. And there's just this wonderful joy as they leave. People sometimes clap. The music cranks up and woohoo. And then they leave. And I stand here and go, may God bless and keep you. And may you do a little bit of what we talked about. Because outside of those doors is trouble. I don't know what kind of trouble it's going to be. It could be financial. It could be health. It could be family. It could be employment or unemployment. There's trouble out there. And at the risk, when they walk out these doors, they go out into the world, they get their jobs, they start their life, and they're in this place, they turn to each other so naturally. They stand here and look at each other. They're holding hands. Odds are when they go out there and they face trouble, they turn away from each other. And they turn their back on each other. Whatever the crisis is, they look the other way. And they go opposite directions. It's happened to Rebekah and Isaac. It's happened to marriages since Rebekah and Isaac. Let me encourage you, couples, turn to each other because trouble is out there. It's going to come. I don't know in what shape or form. I don't know when or where. But when it does come, don't turn away. Turn to. And that's the hardest thing to do because you might be angry at your spouse. They might have caused the trouble. But you've got to turn to them. This family is going to implode in just a minute. It's tragic. And one of the main reasons why it implodes is because they've worked in fear, not faith, and they've turned away, not to. When crisis comes, you must turn to each other in a family, in a relationship. You must turn to one another so that you can face that as a unit, as a couple, learning to love through whatever comes your way. Jacob answers in verse 11. Jacob answers his mother, "Behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man." Don't you find it hysterical? He's not talking about ethics. He's talking about tactics. He's not talking about morality. He's talking about the strategy. He doesn't say, "Mom, you're crazy. That's nuts." He says, "But Mom, I'm smooth." He's hairy. Remember, Esau was born with the sweater on. All right, he is hairy. He's got hair coming out of every pore. He's a hairy man. Jacob doesn't wonder about the morality of this decision. He runs if he can actually do it. Perhaps my father will feel me that I am, and I will be a deceiver in his sight. I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. His mother says, your curse be upon me, my son, and boy, howdy will it ever be. Only obey my voice, not God's. Obey my voice. And go, get them for me. So he went and he got them. He brought them to his mother in verse 14. And his mother made savory food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments. Now just picture this. Here's Rebekah. This is her loved son. This is almost like she's dressing an infant. Took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house. So she went to Esau's closet and got clothes. Put them on Jacob, her younger son. Can you imagine how they fit? Esau is a hunter. He's a big burly man. Jacob is a herdsman. He's not as big and burly. So these are like little boy wearing daddy's clothes. And she put the skins of the young goats on his hand and on the smooth part of his neck. That's where you get him being hairy, okay? She puts goat hair on his arms to simulate Esau. And it works. Watch. She puts, so if you can imagine Jacob. So she gave the savory food, the bread, which she had made to her son Jacob. So if you can imagine this 120-year-old man dressed up in his brother's clothes, wearing goat hair and carrying a tray. It's comical, is it not? It's just foolishness. But when you consider sin and when we try to work in fear rather than faith, it's comical. When you get away from it and look at it and go, that's crazy. That's silly. But he goes and read it as a narrative. He walks in, verse 18. Jacob says, "My father." Isaac says, "Who are you, my son?" "I am Esau, your firstborn son. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me." He's lying. Bullface, lying. Straight face. I mean, he could be smiling. Isaac wouldn't know it. He's blind. But he's lying right to his dad. There's no heart in this. There's no shame in this. There's no love in this. He just flat out lies. "How is it," Isaac says, "how is it that you have it so quickly, my son?" "Well, because the Lord, your God, has caused it to happen to me." And then he blames God. God has provided this. He lies to his dad, and then he indicts God on the lie. Yeah, he's in big fat trouble. "Please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not." Maybe Esau, this is crazy. The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So if you can imagine his dad rubbing his arms going, "Well, you feel like Esau." Snicker, snicker. Goat hair on the arms. Feels his neck. You even stink like Esau. But your voice, that sounds a lot like Jacob. Jacob doesn't say anything. "Are you really my son Esau?" And then he says, "I am." The lie is complete. Can you just imagine this 180-year-old man laying in bed, can't see, and his physically able son lying to him, deceiving him? I can just imagine this happen. I can see Jacob approaching nearly a blind father, weak, approaching death. Isaac is vulnerable and unaware. There are traitors about. Jacob is in a crazy disguise, purporting to be what he is not, to steal what he already has. God has already given this to him. It's not just Jacob's deception, as the title of my Bible says. Jacob's deception is Rebekah's deception, as she stands just outside the curtain. Can you imagine she's standing outside the curtain, watching, listening, but looking for Esau? As Jacob does the lie, she's watching for Esau, protecting her son. Wife and son both lying to a dad and a husband. Isaac has lost his sight. Notice the sensories that are being used. Sight is in verse 1. Taste is in verse 4. Touch is in verse 21. Hearing is in verse 22. Smell is in verse 27. The only thing that's missing here is the spiritual sense. They're not listening at all to God. All of their senses are engaged except the one that connects them to God the Father. But then there's the greatest ugliness of all, and that is betrayal. Betrays the trust and love and protection that he owes his dad. Isaac gets it right in the back from the hand that is supposed to protect him, his wife. In the hand that is to take his name into the future, his son. Esau is guilty of impulsivity and misplaced priorities, but he didn't lie, nor did he abuse his father. So I don't know who's worse. It's discouraging stuff, isn't it? This is sad. But when you disrespect your parents, when parents don't turn to each other, when everyone forgets to walk with God, this is exactly what happens. Jacob's responsibility. Jacob made a decision to follow and even participate. He is culpable. He can't stand back and say, my mom made me do it. My mom made me do it, and hide behind her skirt. He is guilty. And the last application you get from Jacob is, don't lie. It's that simple. Don't lie. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Be honest. Speak the truth. Speak the truth in love. Speak the truth without fear. Face the consequences. Stand for faith. Believe that God will take care of everything. Just don't lie. Sometimes the Bible is as easy to understand as anything. Don't lie. Tell the truth. And let God be the one who protects you. And so Jacob blesses him, gives him all that he intended to give to Esau, but was rightfully given to Jacob. And the promise in this culture, when they do the blessing, it's as good as an oath. It's as good as a contract that cannot be revoked. It is, once it's been stated, once it's been said, it can't be brought back. Because we in the 21st century would read this and go, oh, well, this blessing was given under false pretense. We can retract this and put it under this. He was lied and deceived. That's not how it works in this culture. Once the promise has been made or once the blessing has been given, it cannot be given back or taken back. It's done. And so he speaks the blessing. And now it came about in verse 30. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, Jacob got out of there as fast as he possibly could. I'm sure that's how it happened. And Jacob, hardly gone from the presence of Isaac, his father, then Esau, his brother, comes in from hunting. Can you imagine him? He's running. He's getting his savory food ready. He brings it to his father, and he says to his dad, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. Can you imagine this happening? Jacob just left. Isaac has just wiped his mouth off. He's getting ready to rest. And here comes Esau. Arise, my father. Eat of my food and bless me. And Esau is so excited about what is going to take place. Isaac says, who are you? I am Esau. I am your son. Then who, he says it violently with a tremble, who was that hunted game and brought it to me so that I ate it all before and blessed him who brought it to me? Yes, and he shall be blessed. And then you can hear Esau screaming, crying out, bless me also, oh my father. Did you break your heart? He wants his father's blessing. He wants his father's approval. He wants it so badly he cries out, Dad, bless me. Isaac is putting it all together. He says, your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing. There's another theory to this, because Esau and Jacob have two different voices. And it says just a little while ago that Isaac recognized a different voice. The one theory is that perhaps Isaac recognized Jacob's voice and thought, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to go ahead and bless Jacob. I know it's Jacob. But when Esau comes back, I'm going to blame Jacob. I'm going to hide behind Jacob's deception. I kind of think that might be a good theory. That Isaac knew exactly what to do and was confronted with it, but refused to obey. And Jacob deceitfully takes what is already his, but Isaac goes along with it. And when you get to this part, wouldn't it have been great if he says, your brother is due that blessing. I was wrong. I admit it. I should give that blessing to him. But he doesn't. You can learn from that when you're caught in something that you shouldn't be. The best thing that you should do is stand up and say, I'm wrong. I did it. I'm sorry. Husbands, when you're in that fight with your wife and you know she's got you, stop the proceedings and say, sweetheart, you're right. I'm wrong. Guilty. Got it. Wives, that works that way too, but it's easier to say husbands, right? You could say, I'm wrong. You're right. When your employer is talking to you and you know you've made a mistake, stand up and say, I did that wrong. Don't try to pass it off onto somebody else, as I see what Isaac is doing here. Let's just try to pass that off onto Jacob. Jacob stole this. Blame Jacob. He should have said, Esau, that's your brother's. I'm wrong. Be quick to repent and quick to acknowledge error, because it's just going to get worse as the story does. Esau says, is he not rightfully named Jacob? Remember, the name Jacob means one who grasps at your heels. It's kind of like that guy behind you in a foot race who trips you, who's always dipping at your heels. That's Jacob. It could mean that, or it could mean one who protects you from behind. Jacob could go either way. We'll talk about Jacob here in a couple weeks. But Jacob could be someone who defends what's right from the back. I got your back. I will protect. Or it could be somebody who deceitfully takes what's not his. He says, isn't he rightfully named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. Whoa, wait a minute. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. That's revisionist, is it not? Did he steal his birthright? You remember the story? He sold his birthright. Okay, Esau has a problem with accepting responsibility for his impulsivity. Add that up. He lied. He should have said, I gave him my birthright, because he did. He sold birthright for a bowl of soup, which, as we all know, is not even a meal. He sold it for some stew. Behold, he says, Isaac says, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as your servant, as his servants. And with grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now, as for you then, what can I do, my son? Feel the weight of that room? The shoulders are just so heavy. Esau is just left with nothing. He says, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even also my father. He repeats what he says early on. Esau lifted up his voice and he cried. This family is imploding. We can learn a couple things from Esau. What you reap is what you will sow. Esau has lived a life of impulsivity. He's lived a life of instant gratification, and he is going to sow a life of the same kind of life he's led. He is not an angelic son with impeccable character. He's selfish. He's me-driven. He is all about him. What tastes good at the moment is what he wants. He doesn't hunt game for his dad. He hunts game to get his dad's stuff. He wants what his dad has. He is a selfish man who has been fooled twice. He is getting what he has sown. Very careful. When you finally reap what you sow and you don't like what you have reaped, ask yourself, what have I sown? And if you have sown that kind of seed, don't be surprised if you get it right back. Embrace your calling, I think we can learn also from Esau. I think Esau knew about God's reordering of the blessing. I think Jacob knew it. I know Isaac and Rebekah knew it. You can't live 120 years and not hear something about the 2 nations, the older serving the younger. Just seems to be improbable. In the background, I can't help but think that the idea of serving Jacob repulsed Esau. That tent dweller, that herdsman, he's not half the man that I am. I'm not going to serve him. He doesn't embrace God's calling on his life. Embrace God's calling. If you know where God has you and you know what God wants from you, embrace it. Take it as yours. You will never be happier if you're serving God where he has called you to be. Even if you don't have money, even if you don't have comfort, if you're in the middle of where God wants you, you'll never be happier. So some might be called to a mission field. Well, I won't get the big new flat screen. I won't live in the nice house. I won't have a nice car. I'm not going to have all the comfortable things. Right, but you will be in the center of God's will. And when you're in the center of God's will, you will never be happier and more satisfied. I promise. Because stuff will not replace God's blessing in your life. And that's, I think, what we get from Esau. Don't try to thwart God's plan. Embrace it and follow him. The rest of the story unfolds. Esau prepares for the death of Jacob. He says in verse 41, so Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. In other words, my dad is going to die soon. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. It says there that he comforted himself with these things, but apparently he talks to himself out loud because Rebekah hears this. Again, Rebekah's listening. I'm going to kill my brother. Now, I have said that before. Those of you who have siblings have said that before. I'm going to kill you. That's called hyperbole. It means I'm going to do something to you, but it's really not death. It's not a death threat. That's a death threat. Okay? I will kill him. It's premeditated death threat. As soon as Dad dies and the mourning is over, I will kill him. And I will take what he took from me. Now, therefore, Rebekah hears this. Behold, she says, behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now, therefore, my son, obey my voice. Remember we did that last time? And arise, flee to Haran to my brother Laban. Stay with him a few days until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides and he forgets what you did to him. It's kind of an indictment on Esau's passion, isn't it? He'll forget about this in a week. Don't worry about it. He'll sleep it off. Be fine. Come back in a week or two. Jacob never comes back. Why should I be bereaved of both of you in one day? Rebekah says to Isaac, she manipulates him, I'm tired of living because of the daughters of Heth. Do you think that's really true? I mean, I know that the daughters of Heth, those are Esau's wives, have caused her great grief. But she's using that in a different way. So she says, I'm tired of living because of my daughter-in-laws. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, it means Jacob's not married yet, like these, from the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? In other words, if Jacob marries one of these girls around here, I'm going to kill myself. Isaac hears this, so he calls in his son. There's an unfortunate chapter break here. It should be, chapter 27 should go all the way through verse 5 of chapter 28. Basically, Isaac calls Jacob, says, you need to go to Paran and live with Laban and find yourself a wife. And the story just kind of peters out in sadness because Esau is consoling himself to kill his brother, his twin brother. Jacob goes hundreds of miles away. And then you're left with Rebekah and Isaac, a couple that's not turning towards each other at all. They're already at each other or have distanced themselves from each other. They're gone. The story just kind of ends. And if you're reading it for the first time, perhaps you don't know the rest of the story. Perhaps you're in Moses' day and he's reading it to you. You're hearing this and you're going, well, what about the promise of redemption? What about the promise of the head crusher who will come and thwart Satan that was promised in Genesis 3:15? What about Abraham's promises? What about all the gifts that God is going to give to us as a people? Because now you've got the deceiver Jacob running to a different land. Esau is on a death march. He's going to kill somebody or something. Isaac is dying and Rebekah has deceived and manipulated everyone. What is going to happen to the promise? I think one of the things you can take away from this story is that God's sovereignty is beyond our comprehension. Because I look at this story and think, what good is going to come out of any of this? We've got a dad who is driven by his tastes, a son, Esau, who's driven by impulse, Rebekah who manipulates, and Jacob who lies. Can God not use anybody? He can. And he uses this family to bring about promise and hope for future generations. From 28 all the way through chapter 52 in the book of Genesis, it's about Jacob and how God works in his life. And you might look at your life and think, well, Bob, I don't know if God can use me. I've done some pretty bad things. I've got a past. I've failed in a lot of ways. I'm not that good of a person. Read the rest of this story of Jacob, and you'll see how God gets a hold of this man's life and uses him in a great way to deliver a whole nation, and how God's sovereignty uses great sin and brings about glory. That's not permission to sin or license to sin. It's hope for those who have and look back and go, I've wasted a lot of time. God can use that time and redeem it and bring about great things. Closing applications of this wonderfully encouraging, exciting story filled with hope and joy. Any man driven by impulse will eventually come to complete ruin. If you're driven by impulse of what feels good today and you don't think about tomorrow, you will end up in a ditch. It's kind of like that cable commercial. When you buy digital TV and you end up in a ditch. Okay, it's too long to explain. But you'll end up in a ditch. Your life will come to ruin. Unless, you see, some of you are remembering the commercial. It'll come to that. It will be terrible if you're driven by impulse. You must be driven by principle, obedience. Political, spiritual, economic success doesn't replace harmony at home. Men, I don't care how much money you can make in the oil field. If you compromise your home, you will lose. It will not be worth it. You will have nothing. You must make home a priority. Ladies, home must be a priority. Political, spiritual, economic success will not replace harmony at home. Turn to each other, not away. Even when you appear to be doing nothing, like what Isaac did, you're doing something. Isaac should have been nurturing in his son God's calling in his life. He didn't do that. He did nothing. But in doing nothing, you do something. Do something positive. God's sovereignty, finally, is beyond comprehension. I don't know how God can take such chaos and make such glory. I don't know how He does that. And maybe in your chair this morning, you can sit there and look and go back. Bob, He's done that in my life. There's a lot of chaos back there, but God has brought glory up here. God's sovereignty can turn all things into good to those who love Him. I don't know what's in your past. I don't know what's back there that you're ashamed of, you're embarrassed about. I don't know what it is. But I do know that we serve a God who can take whatever's back there and bring glory to Himself when we follow Him in obedience.